So welcome to everybody who has arrived already. It, of course, is one of those 21st century things that nobody ever makes it to a Zoom on time. So I'm grateful and delighted that you're here. I'm going to give it a couple more minutes and then I'll do a little introduction and switch over to screen sharing. In the meantime, an important announcement that is actually going to factor into the talk a little later on. So I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the ancestral lands of the Abenaki people. And this is their traditional home. And they, like many native peoples in North America, have not been treated well over the last 250 years. And that is actually going to turn into an element of my talk a little bit later on. So we have 8 participants. I'm actually going to pull up the participant list. There's some names here that I recognize and some names here that I don't. That's wonderful. Yes. Feel free to turn your camera on and wave. And so in my neck of the woods, it is 1:02. I'm going to give it one more minute. Yeah, concern for the bandwidth. So what I'm going to do is just check that I'm on the best possible Wi-Fi here. Yeah, this is the best Wi-Fi I've got. I live in a rural area, and basically if a branch falls off a tree anywhere around me, then power goes out, the sump pump fails, the basement fills with water, and the internet goes off. So let us hope that no branches fall off, no trees right around now. Okay, so I think what I'm going to do is to start things going. We're up to 9 participants. People are just flocking in from all directions. And I appreciate, I perceive that pretty much everybody here knows the drill. You've muted your mic, you've turned your camera off to save bandwidth, and we're doing the best we can. All right, so I'm gonna hit share screen, and then I am gonna get going. Okay, so I'm gonna go to slideshow. Come here, slideshow, and okay, start slideshow. Come on, you can do it. You can do it. Play from start. There we go. Huh. Okay, let me just, there we go. Right. Okay, once again, welcome to those of you who've just joined us. My name is Tim Brookes. I'm the founder of the Endangered Alphabets Project. And I'm going to be showing you a variety of slides and raising a number of questions about not only endangered writing systems, but about writing in general. I'm also going to be showing you images of some of my carvings. So the Endangered Alphabets Project began about 12 years ago when I started carving pieces of text in indigenous and minority writing systems in wood. And this is one in progress. And of course, because you're polyglots, you are going to know some, if not all of these. And I can absolutely guarantee all of you speak more languages than I do. When I show these slides, people say, wow, these are great. Do you speak all those languages? And the answer is no, I don't speak any of them. So I began carving by carving pieces of text from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and then began to get more expansive, more artistic, and then more engaged in the struggle, as I'll explain to you later. Many of you will recognize this, not Mongolian, but Manchu, in fact. When I first began this project, it was estimated there were only 10 people on the planet who could read and write Manchu. And now I'm in contact with people who not only read and write Manchu, but teach Manchu and study Manchu. And this is the full photograph of the image you can see over my shoulder. This is in Thai Tam, also known as Lana, from northern Thailand, a spiritual script. But the first thing I want to point out, given that I'm talking to polyglots for the first time, and I have to say I am more than somewhat in awe of you all, is there is no English word equivalent to polyglot that means a person who uses multiple scripts. I put this up on Twitter last night, and now there's a lively discussion. I invite you to follow me on Twitter at eAlphabets. Where people were saying, well, why is this? And what would the word be? And all of the words sound ugly because they're unfamiliar, because there is no such commonly accepted word. And part of it is because language study has been dominated in the West by people who only use one script. And yet the average educated South Asian may know several scripts and may routinely use 3 or 4 on any given day. So straight away, what I'm trying to get at is the notion of who is in charge of this, who has done most of the research, who writes the definitions. And I'm going to argue provocatively that the notion that everyone should use the same script, which of course we've all heard, wouldn't it be more convenient if everybody spoke English or everybody used the Latin alphabet? I'm going to argue that only people who are in a culture that uses only one script should think that they only ever need to use one script. And that's the kind of thinking that leads to other scripts already in existence being dominated, being marginalized, being considered as unnecessary. And as an example of script diversity, I thought I would throw you this photograph. Many of you have seen this, I'm sure, a section of the so-called Wall of Love in Montmartre. This is just one of 3 panels. And it's just wonderful to see the spirit in which this multi-scriptal wall just glows. So one of the points I want to make is that to those of us in the West, one of the reasons why we have these attitudes we do is it's easy to understand a culture's attachment to its language because we all have such deep connections with our languages, and we accept that the Italians will feel strongly about Italian, although of course the Neapolitans may feel strongly about Napoli, and the British feel strongly about English, and of course increasingly there are Cornish people who are feeling strongly about Cornish. But for us, it's much harder to understand a culture's attachment to their script, because ours is just universal. More than 75% of the countries in the world accept the Latin alphabet as an official or secondary script. And so for us, the Latin alphabet doesn't have the same meaning as our mother tongue does. It's universal. It's simply a tool to be used to communicate. I say it's linguistic duct tape. So in many ways, then, the people who are in charge of the world are the people who are least able to understand the importance of minority and indigenous writing systems, or as I call them for short, endangered alphabets. To many minority cultures, their script is so important to their identity that it's used in public, even though almost nobody can read it. So in North Africa, there are still relatively few people who read and write fluently in Tifinagh. And yet, the letter Yaz is right there in the Amazigh flag. And that's because it's a reminder that the ancestral version of their script, it can be found on stones that are 2,000 years old. It's a way of establishing we belong here. We have a right to belong. And for an oppressed and minority culture, that is crucial. This is a photograph I took in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, where in the downtown area, the road signs or street signs are in English and also in Cherokee. And again, it's not that most Cherokee can read and write the syllabary, it's that they respect it, that they recognize that it's an important part of their tradition. It's also part of their tradition that, like the Tifinagh script, goes back to a day before their misfortunes began. So the Cherokee syllabary was created before the Indian Removal Act, when so many of the Atlantic coast tribes were driven out of their homelands and dumped in poor farming land, by and large, farther west. And here, many of you will recognize this script. It's Glagolitic. And what we've seen over the last 10 years in Croatia is an increasing use of Glagolitic for sort of architectural terms here, in terms of signage, in terms of art. There is a famous walk that you can do along an alley where there are very large sculptural versions of the Glagolitic letters. It's not just a way of representing the sounds of speech. Standard Western definitions say the purpose of writing is to represent the sounds of speech. If that were true, you would not find writing where nobody can read it. There is an iconic quality to a culture's lettering that goes far deeper than simply wanting to be able to read and write what you say. And here is a terrific example. So this is a sculpture that is in the grounds of an Irish language school outside Dublin. And some of you, again, may recognize this. This is Ogham, which is sometimes pronounced Ogham. And all of the birds are, in fact, part of the sculpture, as is the young woman and the bird on the ground. And so here you have artwork proclaiming the ancestry of the script, even though the script hasn't been fully deciphered. It is, again, it's a sign that we belong. And in this case, the Ogham script predates the British involvement in Ireland and all the misery that caused. So let's talk about how scripts become endangered. What are the threats that we're talking about here? And what is the scope? So there are about 300 scripts in use in the world today. Most people don't know that. It has come as a surprise to me as I've been running our Red List project, and we're trying to identify every script currently in use. More than 85% of them are to some degree endangered. So they're not officially recognized, they're not taught in schools. In some cases, they're actively suppressed. In some cases, they are used for a religion that has a very small number of adherents and followers. So what that means is that roughly, no, that's a side note, I'm not going to go there. Let's look at the story of Mayan. So Mayan, this is a really fascinating insight into writing. So here's the Mayan script, which you all recognize, and you all see how much work and effort has gone into the carving of these individual stone characters or glyphs. So one of the things that that shows is that the Mayans recognized that the act of writing was worth that effort. Now, we don't think in those terms because we have developed much easier and faster and more facile ways of communicating visually using words. But when you look back in history, it becomes much clearer just how important that faculty or that invention is, that they would go to this much effort in order to do this. But of course, what happened to the Mayans was grim. So as part of his campaign to eradicate pagan rites, Bishop Diego de Landa ordered an inquisition in Mali, ending with an auto da fe in 1562. A large number of Maya codices and approximately 5,000 Maya cult images were burned. Only 3 pre-Columbian books of Maya hieroglyphics and perhaps fragments of a 4th are known to have survived. I also ought to say that at this same Inquisition, there was a mass torturing of Mayan nobles. And so it's really clear that the act of cultural subjugation was really what was going on. And the subjugation of writing was an important part of the subjugation of Maya culture as a whole. And the Mayan writing system was functionally extinct within 50 years. 50 years is a good number. That's basically 2 generations. That's all it takes. When you have 2 generations that don't use a script, it is pretty much gone. That's interesting. My little move to the next screen. There we go. This is Ranjana. Ranjana is a particularly elaborate Nepalese script. This is actually a poster that was designed by a typographer in Nepal. The Ranjana script, by the way, is particularly interesting because there is a version of it in which all of the letters are stacked on top of each other, which creates this extraordinary single glyph that has all of these vertical lines of gradually increasing length and all those diagonals. And in part, this was to save space, but actually it was also so that it acted as a cryptogram. So only people who knew the system could actually tease apart the individual characters from it. I won't read all of this. I'll make this available. Obviously, this is being recorded, so you can come back to it. But basically, the use of the Nepalese scripts began to decline in 1769 and then got steadily worse and worse. And the section I've bolded down the bottom, in 1912, all property ownership documents and deeds written in any of the Nepalese language, scripts rather, were officially nullified. In other words, the people who owned those properties would lose their property if they wrote in that script and that language. Even as late as 1941, poets and writers using the scripts, the Nepalese scripts, were thrown in jail and their property confiscated. And again, the property confiscated, it just goes to show that in the eyes of the powerful, writing is as important as any other human right and any civil right. And so we see writing being targeted for that reason. So what does this do to the people who have lost their script? The Karen people of Southeast Asia, only too aware of the importance of lacking their own script and literary tradition. In the 1820s, Karen villagers told the Baptist missionary, "We have been an ignorant people without books, without a king, without a government of our own, subject to other kings and other governments. We have been a nation of slaves, despised and kicked about, trodden underfoot by everybody like dogs." That is extraordinarily powerful. And it's the flip side of the common conception that writing is a sign of civilization. That if a society has evolved, a word that I put in quotes for many reasons we haven't got time to go into now. If society has evolved to a point of civilization and having writing, then they are a genuinely civilized society. Unfortunately, the flip side of that means that especially in South Asia and Southeast Asia, cultures that do not have their own script or do not have a tradition of literacy are viewed as being inferior and primitive. This kind of contempt and degradation has led to the creation of many writing systems. Especially in Southeast Asia, South Asia, West Africa, what we see is the creation of new scripts as a means of reclaiming the dignity and the integrity of the culture. So Xianglui Yang was Hmong. He was a farmer. He's one of two people we know of, the other being Sequoyah, the Cherokee, who did not read and write, some would say was illiterate, and became literate by creating a writing system for his people. So, wait a second, it's happening again. Why is this not advancing? I do not know. Try that. And in 1959, he announced that he'd been inspired by God. A lot of new scripts come as a result of dreams or visions or inspiration to create a written language for the Hmong. He actually created two. He also created one for the Khmu, but that's been lost. And the effect of his invention on the Hmong was rapid and radical, as was the adoption of the Cherokee syllable by the Cherokee, and also the syllabics created by James Evans among the Cree. The value of being able to write was self-evident right away, even though in the case of the Cherokee, the previous belief was that writing had been witchcraft. So almost at once, he took on a messianic status for the Hmong. His followers called him and still refer to him as the mother of writing, and he became this charismatic figure. However, one of the points that I think is important to make is that if you have someone from a minority culture who becomes a charismatic figure and transforms their people's sense of value and dignity, then whoever's been oppressing them is not going to be happy. Here's a carving I did of the Paho Hmong script that Xianglui Yang created. Apparently I don't have, no, I was relying on myself to tell you this. So he, at the time, he was living in Vietnam. He was arrested several times. He used his incarceration as an opportunity to keep on developing and fine-tuning his script. Eventually, he fled into Laos, where once again his effect on the Hmong living in Laos was extraordinary, and was so extraordinary that in the early 1970s, the government of Laos sent soldiers to assassinate him. And here's the thing: we know of at least 4 people who have been assassinated, killed, murdered, whatever you want, for the act of creating a writing system for their people. That's how potent an act it is. And that's how potent writing in general and having one's own script is. Okay, so now let's look on a more positive note on what's going on in terms of revival of scripts. We talked about the Nepal scripts or Nepal Lipi, one of which was the Ranjana. So there's an organization called Kalajatra, and the typographer I mentioned to you earlier is part of this organization that is doing this absolutely wonderful thing. It's like a cross between guerrilla art and street theater, I suppose, where they do pop-up calligraphy lessons. They do them in bazaars and on street corners and in markets. And here you see a bunch of people who just went along to the market and were sort of invited to sit down and learn to write in this really exquisite formal Nepalese calligraphy. And they're having a great old time doing it. And here is the dude who is holding it up to show how proud he is of it. And I'm suggesting this really suggests a new meaning to the phrase cultural literacy. So this doesn't mean to be literate in cultural information. It means to have a culture that has its own literacy in its own script. Some of you, especially those of you who follow the endangered alphabets, are familiar with the name of King Ibrahim Joya of the Bamum Kingdom in what is now Cameroon. An extraordinary figure. Starting in 1896, he created a script that was first largely a series of graphic symbols, and then it steadily became more syllabic over about a period about 10 years. And here we have a painting of him teaching his script to his court and his counselors. So the act of teaching is as important as the act of creating a script. There are a number of people I know who've created scripts and are the only person who is teaching that script. This is why, by the way, I regard emerging alphabets as being very similar to endangered alphabets in that they're like young birds. You know, all of the forces of nature are threatening them. It is a tough and dangerous road ahead of them, even if their author doesn't get assassinated. So here's Njoya teaching his script to his courtiers. And he had this extraordinary, actually, I'll go back because I don't want you all to be reading that while I'm telling you this. He had this extraordinary insight, which was that especially during the colonial era, a people would not be themselves, would not be a unique and dignified people with integrity unless they wrote their own history in their own language, with their own script. And that is an amazing notion. And of course, when you think about that notion of history being written by the winners, you realize that especially in a colonial era, the history of colonized countries is written by the colonizers. And he recognized that this was not the case. And this was a crucial element in the survival, the psychic survival, if you like, of his people. And so he did write a history of his people in this script, a pharmacopoeia, calendars, maps, records, legal codes, and a guide to good sex. He built schools, a printing press, libraries. He supported artists and intellectuals. But at the time, Bamum, or Cameroon, was a German colony, and the Germans and Njoya got on reasonably well. When the French took over, they maneuvered him out of power, smashed the printing press, burned the libraries and books, tossed out many of the sacred Bamum artifacts, and sent Njoya into exile, where he died. So even though he isn't one of the four who was killed for creating the script, he clearly was one of the many who took a hit because of his support of the script. So revival. Here is what I believe to be the first book of poetry written in the Bamum language and the Bamum script in what must surely be 100 years. It just came out, published by an organization called Athinkra. If you go to Amazon and you type in "From the Resilient Shadows," it's actually for sale there. Or I have a Kickstarter coming up soon. You can get it as a reward on our Kickstarter program. And the Endangered Alphabets is currently starting to get involved in the script revival in Bamum. We're helping to publish a dictionary, and we're working on classroom materials so that the script can be taught again. And like the Cherokee script, it is recognized and revered throughout the country, but people can't read it. So it's that graphic quality, that iconic quality of writing. It's just sitting there, and people kind of go, "Oh, yes, I know that." It's a heyday to when the last time when we had freedom and self-respect. This is my friend Mong New. So let me see if I have a picture of what happens next. No. So in 2012, I went to Bangladesh to do some public health work. And while I was there, I asked whether there are any endangered alphabets in Bangladesh. And I learned that Bangladesh has a very curious history in that it was founded as a result of a civil war that separated it from what is now Pakistan, largely on the cry for the right to use their mother tongue. Mother Tongue Day, or International Mother Language Day, is at the heart of and grew out of that movement. But as soon as Bangladesh became independent, they established, or the government established, that you had to be a Muslim, you had to be a Bangla speaker in order to have full civil rights. And so all of the indigenous peoples, some of whom were animists, some of whom were Christian, some of whom were Buddhist, all of whom spoke their own languages, were immediately denigrated to semi or lower class citizenship. And Mong grew up in an area, and I'll tell you his first day of school story. So he is an ethnic Marma, M-A-R-M-A. The Marma have their own language. They have a script which is derived from the Burmese script. And he was a bright little kid, and he was looking forward to school, and he went off to school. And when he was 6, and he sat down, and the teacher began talking in a language he didn't understand. And so, not surprisingly, even though he was a bright kid and very willing, his attention began to wander, and he looks out the window, and the teacher immediately calls him up to the front of the class, makes him put his hand out, and canes him for not paying attention. And that happened again, that same class. And amazingly, Mong's mother, and we're talking, a village society here, we're not talking wealthy people, recognized how brutish this was, and sort of homeschooled him and got him into a boarding school elsewhere in the hill tracts. And eventually he wound up going to the University of Hawaii. He was the first of his people ever to go to the United States. What Mong did was to get an education, a college-level education in engineering, and then in business. And then when I met him, he was in the Graduate School of Education at Harvard, studying multilingual education, because what he wanted to do was to go back to the hill tracts and set up schools where children, indigenous children, could learn in their own languages. And so he and I worked on this project together, along with students of mine at the college where I was teaching at the time. And this, I believe, is the world's first 6-language pictorial schoolbook dictionary. So each page has the image, and then it has the word for that in English and in Bangla, the national language, which are at the bottom, by the way, not at the top. And then in Chakma and Mro and Marma, and in Tripura, which is another minority language that uses the Latin alphabet, which you'll see in the top left. And we wanted these to be in a circle, like, you know, King Arthur and the circular round table, so that none would be at the top, none would be most important. And instead, what you'd see is that this is what happens when you have a language community, that most of these indigenous kids speak their family language and maybe 2 or 3 other languages. So it's not that they are backward or primitive, it's that they're not speaking the language of authority, or in this case, using the script of authority. This was the first school that Hmong helped create with, you know, working with the community. And actually, this was a Buddhist temple that had been burned down by the military. Hmong came across it, and the monk was, the temple monk was there, and there were also some kids. And Hmong asked the monk, you know, what are these children doing here? And the monk said, you know, they're homeless. Their villages have been burnt. And as a good Buddhist, it's my responsibility to take care of them. But he couldn't teach them. And so it was like, how do we move beyond simply taking care of the physical welfare to how do we create these kids as real citizens with self-respect and dignity? And so this then became one of the schools that Hmong developed. This is a kid writing numbers in Marma. And here are kids with their first books in their script. These are actually Marma books. We've done books in a number of scripts. And I mean, look at their faces. It's ridiculous. The sense that they have been granted respect and acceptance by having their language and their script given this kind of priority is wonderful. So I told you at the beginning about the Abenaki. Those of you who just joined us a little bit later, I am speaking to you from the ancestral lands of the Abenaki people. And after I had done this dictionary for the Hill Tracks, I thought, you know, I've been doing all this stuff with indigenous people around the world. I haven't done anything for the indigenous people in my own backyard, which of course is actually a very common problem. So I worked with one of the 4 Abenaki bands in the state of Vermont to produce something similar. This is a different illustrated dictionary. It doesn't have 6 languages, but it has Abenaki. And there are, as far as I'm aware, there are no materials for teaching about Abenaki history and culture in the state of Vermont in the schools. In fact, there's only one program for actually teaching Abenaki language at Middlebury, which just started up a couple of years ago, and I've done a bunch of signage for them, and I developed playing cards with their alphabet on so they can play alphabet games with those. But this was amazingly enough the first. And I also discovered as I was working on this that in the Vermont State House, there was no visible recognition that the Abenaki ever existed. And so I did this carving, which says, so this says Abenaki, but what that word means is people of the Dawn Lands. And so I did this carving. This is the deputy, the lieutenant governor. And that carving is now hanging in the State House. And as a result of that, there's now an exhibition of Abenaki materials in the State House as well. But it was that's a sign of how things change. So the fact that people visiting the State House saw this word in a language they didn't speak, using this font, which, by the way, my art director developed based on Abenaki artwork, because theirs was traditionally an oral culture. That was enough to make them go, oh, we need to do something about this. So again, another great example of the fact that a script is not just a convenient manifestation of the sounds of the language. And this is the Endangered Alphabets logo in Abenaki. And the reason we did this is because the Middlebury Abenaki program is a total immersion program. Students in the program are not allowed to speak English. They take a pledge. And so instead of saying Endangered Alphabets on the back of these cards it now says Endangered Alphabets in Abenaki. That's all I've got, but I really, as you would imagine, we operate on a shoestring. It would be wonderful if you could support us either on Patreon, so patreon.com/Tim Brookes, or you could follow us on Kickstarter. So I have a Kickstarter coming up in just about 10 days to fund my next book on endangered alphabets and writing in general. And again, if you go to endangeredalphabets.com, our home site, you can get information about that.